Joe Powell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to all the honourable members that secured this debate. In the general election, like other members have mentioned, we met thousands of voters face to face, and by far the most depressing conversations I had were with the many people who had lost trust in our government institutions, our politicians, and our democratic process. And I absolutely don't think the voters are to blame for that. Part of that was, of course, the last decade of chaotic government, lurching from crisis to crisis, corruption scandals, decline of local services, and that drove lots of people to opt out of this election, with the poor turnout figures that people have referenced, the lowest for 20 years. But I don't think that is just apathy. It's an alienation from our political system that is a fundamental threat to our democracy. And I agree with my honourable friend from Exeter that we shouldn't for 1 minute think that electoral reform alone will solve that issue. The central task of this government is to deliver rising living standards, rising wages, improve public services that will help restore faith in politics and government to deliver on things that people care about. I will give way.
On that criteria.
I think record levels of investment, record rises of wages, fastest growing economy in the European Union, upgrades from the IMF and OECD speak for themselves. But on this issue that we're focusing on today, I do think fixing our democratic plumbing matters too. The Prime Minister said that restoring trust in politics is the battle that defines our age. And I believe that we earn that trust by ensuring that people feel heard and that they have a decision, that they have a say in decisions that affect their lives, and that I'll just make a bit of progress, and that their voice matters. And that is the foundation of my belief in electoral reform. That done right, with appropriate models for different levels of government, it can help to rebuild faith in our democratic system before we end up more polarised, with more alienation that leads to extreme politics and populism. And I agree with my honourable friend sat next to me that today is not the time to go into models. But I do think you can retain the constituency link and expand choice, such as the Australian model, which gives local winners a degree of preference from a majority of the voters in their district through ranked choice voting. There is an excellent analysis today from Lewis Baston on Sam Friedman's website explaining how the Australian model could be appropriate for us. It's easily understood, it encourages engagement across the spectrum beyond the swing voters that otherwise become the predominant focus of elections. And while I support electoral reform for Westminster elections, I do think there's a straightforward policy change that the government should consider immediately, and that's restoring ranked choice voting system for mayoral elections. That system worked perfectly well in London and other mayoralties, allowing voters to express preferences and ensure that winners had broad support. And its removal by the previous government was a regressive and self-interested step, one in London that failed, but actively tried to reduce voter choice and participation. And I hope the government will consider restoring that system in any future elections bill that's been discussed for a future session. Finally, I'd just like to briefly address another threat to our democracy that the APPG on Fair Votes is focusing on, and that's the role of foreign billionaires in distorting political discourse and the risk of overseas donations into our politics. There are still far too many loopholes in our electoral financing rules that leave us vulnerable to foreign interference, and I hope the government will consider reforms to address these very serious issues in any future elections bill. Because if we're serious about defending democracy, we need transparency and safeguards over those with the deepest pockets that seek to warp our democratic institutions. Madam Deputy Speaker, our current system is failing to command public trust. That's the foundation of my belief in electoral reform. If we continue down this path, we risk losing something far greater than individual elections. We risk losing the faith of the people in democracy itself. I'm very confident that our government will deliver on its key missions, and that will go a long way to restoring trust and confidence in government. But our democratic plumbing matters too, and it's time for an upgrade.
Noah Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.